If there's one thing I know about sewing, that is it often starts very innocently on the kitchen table where you pack up and pack down your sewing machine and you have like one set of scissors and that's it. That quickly changes and your sewing machine's permanently set up. You start taking over a little corner sideboard because who wants to pack up and down all the time? And then before you know it, it's taken over the sideboard, the more drawers. There's a whole area, a whole corner of the house is now your own permanent sewing space. And then it's not long until the entire spare room that you once had for guests is completely taken over with your sewing stuff. And it is now the sewing room. And well, every other cupboard in the house houses fabric and patterns and other habitatery. You know what I mean, right? This is a common trait all us sewists have is we got a lot of stuff. But it's not just about the stuff. It's about the spaces we have for our sewing room. It's our space that we sew in. It's our creative space. Let's analyze my sewing room here. I'm going to take you for a little tour and break it down so you can start breaking down your sewing room as well to get a better workflow and just a nicer sewing environment to be in. I find that organizing the one space into 8 different spaces, I have found by analyzing my room here, I have 8 different spaces, the ways that I think about storing the things that I have that really help keep me organized. And that means a better workflow. And to me, that is really important. And I know that that is important to you too. So I've actually come about this video idea as I was analyzing my own space here because I actually am quietly in the process of, if everything goes to plan, building and organizing my dream sewing studio. So I am so excited. More on that later. That's a whole other topic. But it means I've been really assessing this, what makes a sewing space great. So when I'm in this space here working and I'm moving about and I'm trying to find all my things, what makes it beautiful? What makes it successful in me being able to find everything, in being able to get all the pieces and work nice efficiently? So I've been deep analyzing and I've broken it down into these spaces that I think we all have. And the first one is the sewing area. Now, of course, this one is quite obvious and we won't spend a lot of time here, but your sewing area is kind of like what I think about the 0 point, the center where all of the other areas and spaces come from, because your sewing machine is the center of it. Everything else navigates around from that. The main points that I have for you to think about are nice, strong, sturdy sewing table, unlike this one here. You don't want a wobbly one. And having your overlocker, serger, or multiple machines kind of in access together so you can get them. Think about the sewing space like the center, because then the next thing that we always do with sewing is you want it close by as we go into the ironing station, where of course you must press as you go. Number 1 rule, you need your iron reasonably close so that you can actually press and go. Now I have actually been playing around with new irons lately, this one here and this one, and there's still another one that I want to play around with. So if you're interested in those ironing videos, let me know. I'm testing them out because my other one broke. So irons aside, there's a few other things you should have at your ironing station, including your pressing hams, absolute must. You can see my mess here. I have all my bias tape makers. I always have chalk and this, and of course, pressing cloths, because you absolutely need pressing cloths. Otherwise, you can burn stuff. No yucky interfacing or left on anything. Always have pressing cloths on hand. Okay, speaking of ironing things, I want to show you this new in my setup as well. It is this little like mini iron that I can put on my table next to my sewing machine. I've only used it really a few times, and it's on this little mat and an old serving tray that I found to protect it. This is just a wool pressing mat, but it has been working really well. I mostly got this to experiment when I'm filming so that I can quickly iron things at the sewing machine without having to get up, turn the iron on, move everything around and do it like that. But so far it's been quite handy, so might be something you want to look at too. But your ironing station is a space, an area, and all the things that are included in that space are something that's really needed to think about in your area. This one could just be my favorite because it is the habitatery store. This is definitely one part of my sewing areas that has expanded over the years. This used to be a very, very, very small area. Now it's a lot, but it is something we need to think about in how we store and where all of our habitatery stuff live. So what does the habitatery things include? It includes things like buttons, zips, trims and ribbons, more trims and ribbons, and even more trims and ribbons, and elastics. Ooh, Threads, of course, threads. My threads have taken over this lovely sewing box that was lovingly made for me. Basically, it's all of those other trims, accessories, and everything that's needed to create your garment. And often, you know, they're things that we collect along the way as well. So you need an area or a space to put those. You generally don't need these on hand very close to where you're sewing. So it's often, these can be fine in a cupboard or something further away like I am, but it is a space and area that's needed to be considered to store them. Now, how you organize and store all these things is for another day. But that's a space or an area that I have identified that we need to store things in. Okay, the next area is, although in the same spot for me, not really connected at all, and that is the library. So this is my collection of books for learning, sewing books, old, new, vintage, also different sewing magazines from the past I've collected, and even inspirational things. So maybe just books that just you keep around for inspirational purposes. Pattern drafting books, all kinds of things. This is the library of all of those. And ironically, this space is one that's actually relatively new to me, that I have more of these things, the better I've gotten at sewing. Rather, when I first started sewing, although these things were harder to get, of course, way back 25 plus years ago, I didn't really have many books or anything. Like sewing helps back then, but now my collection is huge. And you know, I love collecting. Vintage sewing books are my absolute favorite. You learn so much. And one thing I do get to add to my library these days is my own sewing books, working on guides for vintage sewing school and putting together workbooks and everything at the moment. I'm so excited. I never thought I would get to put my own books into my own library, except I don't know who designed this shelf because it doesn't fit A4 folders in. So I'm going to have to figure out something else for my workbooks. But moving on, shall we? And everyone needs the cutting space, or also known as the dumping ground. So it can be two things. So I say cutting table, but honestly, it might be the floor for you. It was for me for many, many years, and now I have a nice table. I used to have a better table, but now I've got this one. And so it doesn't matter what it is. You need that space to be able to cut out your patterns and your fabric, be it a table or the floor. Now, if it is the floor, and then you might have another table that is what I call the dumping ground, because on our table, we also put, it's like where you put everything. You might start to like pin stuff together, cut out your ribbons, and just generally like everything you get ends up being like dumped on here randomly. So there is always that zone that you need. So think about it. It could be placed into two. If your cutting table is it's the all-in-one. And if you have the cutting floor and then a small table, like work table, it's going to be those areas. And what we want near here is a lot of our tools and everything. And I will get to these in the later points as well. But you generally want like your scissors, your pins, your pencils, your rulers, and all these sort of things quite close to this, because this is also like your main workstation that goes in with your sewing area as well. So they're kind of linked and you want them close together. I find thinking of it that way, what you want close together and around each other, is very helpful in like sorting and organizing and space planning. But let's move on to the next one, because the next one is fabric. Yes. Now, if you're a sewist and you somehow don't like fabric, I don't even know why you like sewing, because I think it's a common trait that we are all fabric hoarders, or at least I am. That is clear. I'm not going to even pretend to hide that. I love my fabric. And so you will too. And whether you have a small amount or a lot amount, you need to store it somewhere and think about where you're going to store and organize all of that fabric. I have fabric here in these cupboards. I have fabric on rolls, I have fabric on bolts, I have more fabric stored in here, and I have more fabric tucked away under here that you never see either. And more fabric in here and here. So currently I really need to sort through all this, and as I said, sorting and organizing the how-to is very personal, and I will make future videos on that, but putting all your fabric in one place where you can find it is much more convenient, because then you can go to your fabric cupboard and look at all the pretty things and then decide which you want to use for your next project. And you'll want to keep your fabric in a nice sort of like airtight, not airtight, but light tight and nice dry place as well. So you want those stored in a nice way all together. It makes sense to put them all together, right? And it comes to sewing tools and chests and multiple sewing tools, as I talked about before. I think about it as a space because, one, we generally have like a drawers, chest, somewhere that most of our tools are stored. Then we need multiple tools because we really want them at the sewing machine. There are certain like snips, your tweezers, your everything you want at the sewing machine. And then when you're at the pattern making table, at your cutting table, you want your pencils, your snips, your scissors, your pin cushion, your everything. And then when you're at the iron, you also want those things. So having multiple sets of tools is really important. But I have one main chest of tools that I really love. Let me show you my favorite chest here. Although first of all, I keep all of my scissors over here in this lovely like marble drawer. In the top section here, I keep all of my pattern making essentials and things I go to all of the time. You know, your sticky tape, your pattern weights, your chalks, your tape measures, pencils, pattern notches, all that sort of stuff is at the top, ready to go. Then my top drawer here has the multiple bobbin cases, all of like awls, darning hooks, safety pins, all sorts of things that I don't necessarily need that often, like all of the time, but quite often. As we go down, you might imagine the less used items. Excess sticky tapes, calculators, freezer paper, just a bunch of stuff that I don't use as common. And then down the bottom is even stuff less. I've got my, all of my sewing feet down there, bias tape maker, things that I don't go to very often are down in there. And beside my cutting table here, I have specially made this little pad so I can keep my sewing tools next to it. Little snips, tape measure, scissors, all these things, and I can pop it down and it doesn't smack down on the table. Wrist pin cushion, if you didn't see the tutorial on how to make your own, you absolutely should. I'm going to link it down below. Let's talk about patterns because we all have an area or a space we need to store them. I have two different spaces because some of the patterns I make myself and I like use. These are, once I'm done with them, I hang them all up and I store them and I organize them. So they're all for me hanging in the kind of the middle of the room here, but I need a hanging space for those. But then the other ones, all my commercial patterns, you know, my lovely vintage patterns that I just oh so love, I'll put some on display, but generally they are in a little hidden spot that I will take and show you where they're stored. Okay, so I told you they were kind of really hidden. They're behind my mirror here, all sort of actually not organized at all. That disappeared ages ago. As I said, I need to go through a lot of stuff here. So your patterns will likely be with your fabric or your habitatery or maybe in your library or part of it, but it is something that you'll collect and have and need to think about it as a place or somewhere that you need those. Now, you only need those when you need them, hence why mine are tucked around a corner because you don't need to go for them very often. So I don't think you need to prioritize the space for those so much. So as I was filming this, I definitely recognized that I have a bonus area, an extra area, and that is filming because for me, that is a whole space that I need. That is the space between the space. I have so many lights, tripods, top-down camera mounts, all sorts of things that I need to get the right angles for filming for here and for Vintage Sewing School, all the tutorials I make, that I just need so much space and area. And so that's a whole nother thing. I've had to move those tripods around so much just to film this. So for me, that's a little wild card area. And I bet you have an extra thing, something that you need in your space too, that's unique to you. I'd love to hear about that down below. So anyway, for me, thinking about these different areas, these sections, these spaces, and narrowing it down helps me to plan out and think about what is the ultimate sewing space for me. I can think about the spaces that I need, storage areas I need, uses for my tools, so storage for your habitatery, your library, your patterns, and all of that sort of stuff. And they have their separate areas where they need to be stored. Then, you have, don't forget about the fabric, of course, that has a whole area itself to be stored. And then your sewing space versus in relation to where the ironing station is, in relation to where your work table or your cutting table is, and how that manages your workflow. It's so helpful to think about it in planning. Even if this is a tiny little area and you've got one little tiny table with a set of drawers, it's still useful to sort of break it down and think about it in that way so you can keep yourself organized and get a beautiful workflow for your sewing. When I designed this current space, I actually made a video and I'm going to put a link here on screen because I think you might really like that if you're looking for more how to organize and store, like how to do the individual patterns, how to do the habitatery. That video is for you. Otherwise, let me know in the comments below. Do you have the same sewing spaces or do you have an extra wild card too? I'd love to hear it. Let me know in the comments. Until next time, my sewing friends, happy sewing. Bye.